Alrighty guys, so thank you for coming today. I'm excited to see all of you here. So the purpose of today is to get everybody in our college talking about QEP applications for experiential learning endorsement activities, right? One of the reasons I wanted to do this specifically for CoSM, for our college, is because a lot of us are doing things that overlap, and I think talking about it as a group is a great way to think about how we can collaboratively connect our activities across our classes, potentially even apply for grants together as a larger group potentially. So this is kind of a jumping off point in my mind for, abilities to do that kind of collaborative work. So the nice thing about doing this with our college is I don't really have to explain what experiential learning is to you guys. I know that each of you are doing this in your classes. Well, so we can talk a little bit about kind of what our expectations are when you submit an experiential learning endorsement. But I think that the fact that we are really, all of us in our classrooms are doing the process of learning by doing, right? And these are things that your students in your classes talk about all the time, students that are doing research with you outside of the classroom are talking about, right? So the idea of experiential learning is this hands-on experience, right? And part of this that I think we're sometimes missing is that in our labs, we have students do an activity, right? After they write up a lab report or do an assessment for homework of some kind, right? But we're often missing a lot of the reflection, a lot of the surveying students, how well they think they've learned these topics. So I think that by thinking through this entire cycle, we'll be able to go through the process of thinking about how do we make our actual hands-on learning complete, right? So what we're going to talk about today, guys, is how to develop your activities. And I know some of you have some ideas for activities. Some of you are still thinking about what you should be incorporating as your endorsement, basically. So we do all of these, which is pretty neat across our college. And I think within the classroom is where a lot of us start with our endorsements. So we have things that we're doing like lab experiences. Every week we have our students come to lab, they learn something new, right, and then they do assignment about it, basically. We do field trips, right? We have all of these different experiences across our labs because most of our courses come with labs, right? But we can kind of think beyond that as well, right? How do we have our research projects that students are doing, right? How do we get students working with the community? We also have like field courses that we teach in biology, for example, right? All of these are hands-on learning. And the neat thing is we're really doing a lot of this already. So how do we turn our activities we're doing into these endorsements, which is what we're going to talk about today. So one of the things I want you guys to think a little bit about is how do we center our activities around skills that we want our students to have, right? And so one of the things I want us to do first as a group is kind of think about activities that we can all collectively think about that are going to give our students skills that they can have currently that make them successful, right? Also in the future as they go out into the world. And then I also want us to think about some faculty requirements. So this is something that I want you guys to think about before we even jump into talking about endorsements. I want you guys to kind of collectively think about this idea. So what we're going to do is I want everybody we're going to grab markers and we're going to have our 3 boards that we write things on. First thing I want you guys to think about is what are skills your students could learn in your class activity, right? And this can be quite specific if it's extracting DNA, say, right? Or maybe it's using the IR, right? Or this can be specific to your class, but also let's start thinking about what activities can we do that are just big picture skills that we can get our students to have, right? How do we get something that they can be adopted for other classes, right? Something they could use across chemistry or across biology maybe, right? Or even in their independent research. So that's the first thing I want you guys to start thinking about, right? The next thing is we want what aspects of this activity can they use for their future career, right? Some of these things are either experiences that they can put on their resume, right? When students give research talks or poster presentations, that can immediately be a deliverable on their CVs, right? When they learn a skill set like, learning how to do R, right? If they learn how to write code in R or something like that, that can immediately go on their resume, right? So how do we think about things that can make these students more successful when they leave VSU, right? And then lastly, are there things that materials or tools that you think might be really, really useful to do some of these activities? What can enhance what we already do, right? We already have lots of microscopes in this building. We already have lots of scales to measure things, right? And we can design a lot of great hands-on experiences with what we already have in this building, right? Well, and Nevins and, across the campus, right? We're in Bailey, so that's why. But the idea here is I want you guys to start thinking about what else could we use. So what I want us to do is everybody can grab a marker, and I want you guys to write some things that are skills that we can use on this first one behind Erin over here for success currently. Okay, right? And then we'll write on this one for success that students can have when they leave here, right? And then what I want us to do later, when we start talking, each of you guys are going to talk about your individual activities. I want us to think back to some of these ideas that we have, right, that allow us to, incorporate these into your activities, basically. Okay? Guys okay with that?
Cool.
Yes? All right, so I'm going to make you guys get up now. What can we do across our classes that they can share, right? Question 2 is, what can we include in our activities that they actually can take with them, right? And then 3, we'll go over here, see what you guys think.
Yeah. Written and communication skills, so that will that fit. Written and communication skills. Because they have to write reports and they have to give presentations. So the skills, communication skills.
So one of the things that I think is kind of interesting that I wanted to give you as an example of this, right, is so in my animal behavior course, right, a lot of the students take animal behavior and they think it won't tie to anything else they've ever taken because it's just watching animals run around and mate or do things like that, right? We were measuring seahorses. I know it's a shocker, right? But we were measuring seahorses to look at mating success. And so we did a DNA aspect, right, where we sequenced the DNA of all the seahorses, and they had to look at which ones were successful in mating. So the measurement of the pictures we did was using ImageJ. And it turns out that this is a technique that lots of students in the department got excited about because even though we used it for measuring seahorses, right, ImageJ basically takes a photo and it measures how many pixels your scale is. So as long as you have a known scale of any kind, whether it's a ruler, a penny, as long as you know what that size of that scale is, right, you can measure everything else in that photo. So what we were able to do was take the scale, tell the program how many pixels that scale was, right, and then measure each of the seahorses. Now, what I didn't realize is that all of the students were really excited about this tool and actually took it to multiple labs that they were working in, right? So I have a student who was working in a fungi lab, and they took it to their professor and said, hey, we can measure this using this tool we learned in class, right? Another student used it for parasites, right? Students use it for plants across the department, right? So this is this one tool, ImageJ, right, that all of these students were clicking in their heads, I can use this in my independent research. I can use this in another class, right? And that was a really neat thing that I really didn't see being something that would fit in this category, that would immediately take off. That's a super simple skill. They put it on their resume, though, that they were able to use it, right? And then the students were able to collect data, write a paper, which, as you guys have in your goals, right? Being able to do scientific writing, right? How to do experimental design, how to analyze data, right? These are all things that we have in common across all of our goals, right? Incorporating in your QEP endorsements how your activity is going to help the students learn how to critically think through their data, how they're going to potentially present their data or, disseminate their results across the department or even across the, university. Those are great things that I want you guys to start thinking about in your QEP applications, right? The other thing we have is future success, right? So we can see that a lot of these things are, right, learning how to use instruments, learning, unique techniques, right? Applied techniques. right? A lot of these things are coding crosses all of our departments, right? All of our students have some type of analysis they might have to do that incorporates that, right? So I think that these are things that, as you guys can see that there's all of this connection between what we're thinking about, those are things to stress in your QEP because we want to think about how can your activity go beyond just your classroom, right? So what we're going to talk about in a few slides is thinking about how we can look for funding, okay? And so what I can see up here is that we have things from field technique stuff to lab techniques, right? Things for data analysis, large data. I know we've been talking about that as a college already. So what I want you guys to start thinking about is how do I take these needs and how do I think about ways that we can either individually or collaboratively work to get these resources, right? And that's one of the things that I think is important about us getting together and talking as a group, right? So when you're developing your activity, there's two different approaches that you can take, right? The whole goal, as you guys know, is experiential learning, right? And so, let's see. You guys see where I put my clicker? Oh, here we are. Sorry. I told you. It's like a, find and seek. Okay. So, a lot of times we immediately think of, okay, here are the courses that I'm responsible for covering in my department. I have some that have labs. Maybe some are lecture only, right? You can incorporate these type of activities in your lectures as well. It doesn't have to be just because you have a lab, right? Lecture-only courses are an even better place to start bringing these into the room because they're going to get bored, right? They want to do these activities, right? I think this is actually a better challenge for us as educators to think about how we can incorporate experiential learning into our lecture-only courses. So for my first one that I applied for, I took one of the labs I thought was easiest to explain to anyone outside the college. That was my first one I picked for that reason. It actually didn't have anything to do with seahorses, okay? So it was a really easy to explain lab, or so I thought, right? Until I started writing it out. And then I couldn't figure out, well, what goes where? What order do I do these two labs in? Which one comes first, fieldwork or simulation? Simulation or fieldwork, right? And that was a discussion I had a lot with Colin. So what I want you guys to start thinking about is not just the courses you're teaching, but how do we incorporate both the research in your directed studies and have the experiential learning that you're doing across both of these. This is something that students I've found really respond well to. If you can incorporate some of your research into the classes you're teaching, the students get to work with real data for their experiential learning, and I've noticed a better response from my students when I tell them, this is real data. Your classmates collected this data, right? Those kind of things, right? And so for some of you, you might be thinking about how do I design my future research program, right? Because I know some of you guys are new to VSU. So experiential learning comes down to the classes that you're teaching, which your endorsements are going to be for your courses, but they can also be for your independent research as well. That's an option as well, right? Then you have your undergraduate researchers, right? These are the kids who come from your classes and then move into your research space, right? Whether it's coming in the field with you, working in the lab with you, right? Then you also may have your senior projects, right? So a lot of senior capstone projects or even graduate students, right? For those of you guys in biology, how do we have all of these interconnect? And what I want you guys to think about, this is like a later homework assignment that I think would be really great, is for us to think about how do we connect all of these with our experiential learning. So I really like to be able to take my research and bring it into the classroom. That allows students to feel like you are opening up to them and you're showing them this is what I spend my time working on. You should be excited about this too, right? Now, once you do the experiential learning in the classroom that's related to your research, you get to then move them from students in your class into your research, right? And they now have the skills you already trained them with in class. Like the image J is a great skill. I have thousands of seahorse pictures for students to measure. If you liked it in class, great, you get to be on a publication. Come measure 4,000 more, right? So this is how we can actually pull students in. Also, I know a lot of you have honors tutorial students come ask you, hey, what can I do in this class for an honors tutorial, right? There's ways that you can give them kind of an upgraded experience of what they're already doing in your class by having that experiential learning activity unique to the honors student, basically, right? And that allows them to, have this overlap between kids in your class, but also the undergraduates you're training. They're the same students quite often, right? And that allows you then to recruit because undergraduates that are already well trained here make excellent senior theses students and obviously graduate students, right? Which we've already seen because most of you have had Darcy in your class, right? So she's like our, poster child for this process of learning about this whole system. Now, why do I bring this up as your homework assignment after this to think about? Is because funding is a big part of being able to do experiential learning, right? How do we think about these funds? And I know a bunch of you guys are here today because you want to think about how do you make your endorsement so you can apply for a seed grant, right? Now, the seed grant comes from your experiential learning activity that you're going to put in for an endorsement. You have to have them together. So either you need to take a previously endorsed activity and then apply for a seed grant, or you need to turn them in together. So that's something that's new this year, and I want to make sure you guys are aware of that, because if you're applying for a seed grant, you also have to have the endorsement in together, and we'll talk about that if you guys have questions, okay? Now, in the other circle, which is undergraduate research, here's our BSRI, right? You can take things they've learned from their experiential learning activity and turn it into the summer fellowship. So you can get funding for buying supplies and paying your student in the summer. Faculty seed grants, not sure if you guys are aware, but it does not fund graduate students. So when you apply for a seed grant, it has to be just for undergraduates. That's one of the stipulations, which is why I put it over here. And then external funds is something that I would love for us to have another meeting about as a group and talk about how do we create a rotation project, right? Where people rotate in one lab and learn a technique, and then they go to the next lab, they learn a technique. How can we design maybe a summer program that we could do that with students that are actually able to fill this whole circle, right? So things that you guys are going to think about with your experiential seed grant. These are some guidelines I want to give you. I really recommend, right, our do's column. These are our don'ts, okay? I recommend proposing items you can use every single semester, right? And it may not be across the class that you're applying for, but it could be across other courses, for example, right? Animal behavior last year, I was able to purchase a bunch of GoPros. Now, semesters I don't teach animal behavior, the ecology and evolution course, 3250, can use those GoPros, right? And I can be across my course, but also Erin's section as well, right? So if you make purchases that you can share with other courses, right, or other faculty, right, it brings this endorsement together as a really big collaborative effort. And that's kind of why I wanted you guys today to talk about some of your skills and some of your needs, so you can start making those connections, right? Other things is, right, making sure these are new experiences, right? You may be taking a lab you've done for a very long time, but as you write it up as an endorsement, how do you think about, well, how do I enhance this activity beyond what I've done every semester for this one lab? Maybe it should be a two-part lab, because we can really bring in the idea of they're observing this week, and now they're designing something this week. And we can take that lab and actually make it more experiential-based, right? Also, include a way potentially for students to share their work across campus. And the reason I say this is because last semester, after the students took their GoPros and did their filming, they gave a poster presentation, and it was a really, really great experience because all of the faculty who came got to see it. Thank you for coming. But they got to actually talk about their work using this resource, right? And it allows other people on campus to think about the value of that resource. And now I have people talking to me about borrowing some of the tools that I was able to gain through that seed grant, right? Things to keep in mind, right? If you have something you already buy with lab funds, right, this has to be signed by the dean and the department head. So you want to make sure that whatever you're proposing to buy, that you don't want to put all this work into it and have them say, no, don't apply for this. I can already pay for this with seed grant, with lab funds, things like that. So make sure you kind of run it by your higher-ups just to make sure that what you're proposing to buy kind of fits in line with what they want as well, right? Make sure it's under 4,000. That is one of the other things. A lot of people will work really hard, put all that effort in, and then it will be way over the limit, okay? The other thing is the budget being understandable for outside reviewers. This is something that when we send things across our college, we don't really think too much about DNA extraction, right? We can say, oh, well, people know what DNA is. They know how the extraction process works. I don't really have to go into this a lot, right? But if you explain the parts of the process, the better you explain it to someone outside our college, the more likely you are to be funded, because everyone on that voting board can get on board with that, right? And they can actually think about, oh, I see the value in this, right? So really keep in mind that your reviewers are not going to be from CoSM, okay? That's something I want to make sure you guys know, right? And then no reassigned time. This is something the seed grant does not cover. Faculty grants, seed grants do. So that's a different type of grant, okay, to think about. So what are the benefits of endorsements? So how many of you guys have endorsements currently for your classes? Anybody have one? I know you guys are new, so I don't expect you guys. Okay, awesome. So what are some benefits that you've found from having this activity being endorsed?
I think from the students, they are still trying to understand how to write the reflections, and I think that's to reflect on the process of learning. That's a very important key they are learning right now. Other than they're picking up the skill sets, that's a part of the general course. But just writing about this process of learning, it's an eye-opener for them also. And I'll be honest, a lot of students did not even know how to write this.
Yeah.
They would write the jargon that, it's about the technique. No, it's the process of learning.
Yeah.
So, that's a big benefit for them, because understanding that will help them build hypotheses and things later on, research or any other course that they do.
So I think what, yeah.
Because on this is one of the things I'm really interested in, what the point is with an endorsement, you said everything that they would do in class, but none of that addressed the benefit of the endorsement. Like, what is the value does the endorsement provide to the students? You could have done that anyway, without being endorsed.
I think it changed the way that I can say for me, it changed how I thought about the activity. Because for mine, for example, we're going out and collecting water samples, right? They're all bio majors. They know why water shouldn't be polluted, right? I shouldn't have to convince any of them why pollution's bad, right? But the idea that I made each of them kind of think about, part of the reflection I did was not just how did you collect the data, which was important. They actually didn't realize that they actually understood the data they collected, how to turn it into a bar graph versus a line graph, that kind of thing. They didn't recognize that that was something they had actually learned throughout the semester. But it also allowed them to reflect upon, okay, well, now I need to go back and think about why these pollutants matter. One of the things that I found, though, is that, so I've had the endorsement this is my third semester doing it, right? And so at the end of each semester, when I finish the endorsed activity, right, I sit down and I think about how I've developed that activity. Every semester, I'm changing the activity based upon the student feedback and based upon the feedback of the people who gave the endorsement.
Well, if you were a quality instructor, you'd be doing that anyway. So why?
Yeah, but it gets feedback from outside of just the people who peer review my tenure packet, right? The whole point of the QEP committee is people outside of our college and outside of just thinking about our scientific methods, right? We kind of think about everything from our point of view as scientists, and that everything has to be done according to the scientific method. And that's not how everyone outside of our college thinks, which is what I have found is actually super important. So these are an optional thing that you can choose to do, obviously, but the benefits for everybody is going to be different, right? You may be already doing all of this and you may see no benefit to it, but some people who maybe are not as strong in teaching pedagogy, that don't know how to set up pre and post tests in their classes or things like that, this is something that provides an opportunity for people to get feedback on that, if that kind of makes sense. Yeah.
I have a small, it might be the difference between the field of study too, because computer science, you guys might be doing everything.
Well, I'm in astronomy, so all of our work
it might be the actual stuff you guys are doing, but in biology and chemistry, physics, etc., we have especially labs. She was talking about the lab, it's easy to do the experiential learning stuff, because those labs are cookie cutter labs. Students go into lab, they do everything for the things they are doing it, but there is no thinking happening. They come in, they do it, they only care about whether I get my yield, where I get my result correct.
I get an A.
Nothing, no science, there is no connection.
We're providing them nailing with another gold star.
So there is nothing happening. So the learning process, they just come in, they are robots doing it, getting out. So if I'm going to design something which is historically happening, now happens. Now if I'm going to decide something that make them think, and I am not providing them a procedure, I am not providing them an output, now I am doing it. I am even giving them the analytic data and ask them to analyze it. Now then I design a lab such a way that they have to come, they have to figure out the procedure, they have to analyze by themselves and come up with an answer, which kind of correlate back to what they learned in the lecture. That might be the difference. That's what I think that endorsement might provide to me, right? Okay, this is what I am doing, and that is kind of out of the mold which we are doing historically in my lab. That there is a big change there.
So think about this. If in astronomy, right? Do you have some certification programs? Do you take to evolve as? So if I was a programmer, I was writing a code, right? I would say, okay, in my CV I would add C++. I get but what data do you have to support that? Like what sort of certification do you, how do you say that, yes, I have something, this is the certification I've done.
Okay, so
I see that something like this as a course endorsement. If you apply for external funding, you say that, well, here's this part of the course that was endorsed, and there is a group who was there who are highly qualified to understand this, that in, like Gopi was saying, I will second that, my entire course is not certified. There are just 4 labs, very specific activity that has been certified. And I would say, in the end, when the students learn that activity, what my goal is that in the end, they get certification for that activity.
well,
So that,
fortunately, you're right.
Yeah.
The GitHub part is that as
I'm trying to get prepared for
like suppose you do some kind of project, you're
Yeah.
analyzing astronomical data, you write some software, you make a GitHub repo,
yeah.
and this would be available online, everyone can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that there's a very open source nature to astronomy where everyone can see what you're doing. And
Yeah,
that,
we
you
put
can
things
do
on
that-
GitHub too in
you do that
biology.
for free, you do all of that.
That's the brainstorming session. We are just saying that is one idea there. That doesn't mean we have to do that. And you're absolutely right. I see where this is coming, and that I can see why Gopi was saying this, is that in biology and chemistry, or I would say in astronomy also, you can do the GitHub. Yes, you post it there, right? I absolutely agree. That is just one part of the modules. There are many other things that are there on the board, and what we are trying to do right now is that how can we get together and find ways that, okay, these are very important aspects, maybe somewhere in astronomy or chemistry or biology that are correlating, and how can we collaborate. So as faculty, it's very important for their pre-tenure, because then you can say that, there is a well-defined, we have a math, we have a number there saying that yes, it works, and as students, like Christina was saying that, I have had students, and that's why I'm saying that, for me, I found the student reflections has become just mind-boggling. It's just, there is so much data coming through, is that with one lab, with second lab, with third lab, every time I'm doing this, these prompts are coming in, and what I'm realizing is that I never thought of the way how I would just do a learning class. And I've done that first semester, but then when I got the course endorsement, I got all the feedback, and there's always this feedback from Colin's side, and I'm changing my course. Because there is an active involvement every time. And you could say that, I would do this on my own. What's the need? The thing is that you are getting engrossed because there's a number there to support that data in the end. And when you apply for a federal funding, I would put that, my course activity was endorsed. If I'm applying for NSF funding, I would definitely put that, this part of the activity was endorsed and it ties up to my research. I think the reviewers are going to value that more. So that's how I see,
And I think that each of us have different goals of where we want to go in our careers, right? Some of us are more heavily focused on the research side of things, some are more heavily focused on teaching pedagogy, and some care, more about the mentoring of undergraduates, right? And there are all different directions that we want to go. My argument is that, especially those of you guys going up for promotions and things like that, it allows you to be able to use the evidence from your QEP to be able to include that into what you're doing currently, right? And it allows you to say that outside of the 3 people who peer reviewed me, because our peer review process in our college works as 3 people in your department come see you teach, they look at your information you do, and that's the only evaluation you have, right? If you have evaluations from people outside of our college to say, hey, these activities are giving students all of these skills we just wrote on the board, right? That's something that as you go up for promotion, as you go up for NSF grants, those are important things to be able to say you've done. So we can spend more time talking about the value to us as individuals later, because I am currently working on this, and I've been thinking a lot about this and talking to Dr. Grove actually a lot about how do we include this. Another thing coming down the pipeline from USG is that we all have to eventually prove that we're doing student success activities. That's what's coming down the pipeline from the USG, and that's going to be mandatory for every faculty regardless of your standings, right? These are an easy and obvious way to show that you are doing student success activities, right? So what I want you guys to think about today, right, is that we're going to be talking through your activities to get you guys starting to think about how do I take this cookie cutter lab that I'm doing and how do I turn it into an actual lab that students are starting to grow as scientists with, right? Now, you guys can, there's the blank application that we can open and talk through if you guys are getting stuck on some of these ideas. The guide here actually talks you through every single one of these stages. And the main idea here, right, is that we want to think about what are some experiences the students are having, whether it's the first lab they try in the class, right, and they're just observing two chemicals reacting, right? How do they then reflect on that data? Reflections don't have to just mean how did you feel about watching the two chemicals react. It often means how do you reflect on how fast that reaction happened, right? How do you reflect on your, if you're observing birds out in the wild, did you observe them more in the shaded or the unshaded section? How do they reflect upon that? Maybe they're doing a t-test and a bar graph, right? The reflections can be a variety of different things. I want to make sure you guys are aware that reflections don't just have to be them reflecting on how they feel about what they learned. These can be across a ton of different things, right? And the abstract conceptualization is that they're actually pulling in how do chemicals outside of what we tried react maybe, right? And pulling that data in. And then designing what they do next. Meaning it could be a two-part lab, first lab, and then a second lab, right? We also can design these in the way of the scientific method. We're all scientists here, right? How do we have students have a concrete experience where they're making observations? How do they use that to actually then develop interesting questions, formulate their hypotheses during the reflection part, right? Then that allows them to think through, how do I now design my next phase of the experiment, right? Plan the experiment, try the experiment, right? Test those hypotheses. Then they can go back to the reflection stage. This doesn't have to be a perfect circle where you're never allowed to not go back to another section, right? This is a circle, but it also has arrows all over. And that's the thing that us as scientists really, really enjoy, that we keep making students come back and rethink about these ideas, right? Scientific method continually comes back to redefine how you did the lab. This is the same thing we're doing with our endorsements, right? We design the endorsement, we try it a semester, we reflect upon it, we go back and change it. We make new additions depending upon what the students like, right? So what I want you guys to do today is focus on what are the ideas you have? What are the activities that you're interested in? How can we make them better as faculty together, talking through your activities? And then you guys can think about how do I then put it into this application so that other people outside of our college can look at it and can think about it, okay? So what I want to be able to do is I want everybody to be able to tell us a little bit about your application idea. And we're going to be able to talk through these as a group so you guys can kind of figure out if you don't have your idea yet, we can talk about some ideas that you're thinking about, and maybe hearing what other people are working on might help as well, right? So what we're going to be able to do, guys, is I want you to write your name, write what course you're actually designing for, because that's going to help people kind of think about it. Is this a lecture course, a lab course, or are you trying to do it across both sections of your course, right? How many students are going to be in this course total, meaning how are they going to also be arranged? Some might be in groups, pairs, individuals. Some of you might have them do their project as a group for their concrete experience, but then their individual assignments get turned in as they individually interpret their data through their reflection process, right? Now, it's important that when you write your endorsement that you're very clear about this, because I actually use part of the endorsement that I wrote. I use that now as my homework prompt because I did a better job of explaining it in the QEP than I actually did in their homework assignment prompt. So I stole it and put it into the homework prompt, so now they actually understand exactly what the goals of the lab are, right? Do you have an overall statement for your experiential learning activity? What I want us to do is think about how do you give your elevator pitch around the room, okay? Once you have your elevator pitch, it'll allow us each to kind of start talking to people to help each other design what they want to think about, okay? And then what are the goals you want your students to accomplish? This is one of the most important parts of this process because a lot of you have your cookie cutter activity that we already do in lab, but what do we actually want them to accomplish? And that's why talking amongst each other and saying, oh, well in my class, to get them to accomplish this process, this is how I do it. And I think that that's really what could be useful for everybody in the room. Especially we have some new faculty that are just starting to design their courses here. We have people that have already developed multiple courses here, right? How do we help each other out, basically, okay? So what I want you guys to do is grab a spot. These are the glass boards that move around. Make sure you grab a glass pen. They're the ones that look like this. If you're on a regular whiteboard, there's markers all over. Here's a bunch more. And so each person can have a spot, you guys, and we can actually start talking through your ideas. But this is kind of where I think we should start kind of having this, okay? But what I want you guys to think about, right, is how can we help each other across this room? You guys are all doing really awesome things in your classes and with your research students, because I've talked to a lot of them in poster sessions. I know that we're doing cool things across our department, right? But how do we now collaborate together and actually work as a team, okay?
I have a question about the self-reflection of learning. Would that be also looking at the data and with a critical, teaching them how to look at data
Yes.
critically and how you develop new questions based on the data? Would that be part of the self-reflection?
It could be, yes. So when
in
you're...
addition to what is for them, how they see their learning progressing, or how is helping
Yes.
in a lecture or these kind of
Yep,
things?
and that's something that Ansel's been working towards, is trying to get them to reflect on how well did this activity help me understand the lecture component. And those are things that I talk to students all the time about, is that by having my lab and lecture content, the exact chapter in the book, be what we cover across the two things, students do better on exams because of it, right? And if I have the endorsement that says that, I can make sure that I have support to keep doing that kind of thing. So, if that makes sense. All right, guys, so I want you guys all to grab a marker. Go ahead and write your stuff up. If you guys have questions, you guys can email me at any time after this. If you want to sit down one-on-one because we didn't get as far as we wanted, say, in the endorsement activity, let me know, right? I don't study astronomy, but I wanted to be Miss Frizzle, so that's, that's where I went with my life, right, is the teacher side of things more so than space.